Sorry, people at home. Ask a friend. All right, no one's at home. All right.
Wait, where's Bella?
She's at home. No.
Oh. Awkward.
Yeah.
Never mind.
Sorry, I don't know what I'm supposed to say to that. Sorry. I hate. Okay, sorry. Awkward moment.
Anyways.
Okay, so inverse of a function, as mathematically opposite as we can get. So on a graph, this is kind of strange how not hard this is. For a graph, we just switch the x and y coordinates. So if I'm talking about the inverse, so if I have x comma y, then its inverse is going to be y comma x. Crazy, like mind blown. Now, it's obviously not just that easy. Like if the equation's more complicated, but if I wanted to switch something over and I had 2, 3, I would make it 3, 2, and that would be considered the inverse. Obviously, it's more complicated when there's a line involved or a curve, but for the most part for the graph, that's all we're doing. Now for a function, we have a few little steps, but they're not too bad. And it's essentially kind of what we were talking about up here. So like if this was okay, we're going to be doing now. So we have f of x, and we're going to switch that to its inverse. And the way we show the inverse, the symbol for that is like an f to the negative 1 power it's going to look like. What that essentially means is like you're completely changing it as much as you possibly can. So I'll give you guys some steps. It's not very many, but. If there's an f of x, we're going to put a y in, or a g of x, you're going to put y there. So just understanding that f of x is just y. When I go to find inverse, I'm going to switch where the x and y are, kind of like we did in the graph. So you're going to switch x and y. So wherever x was, we're going to put y. The next step is we're just going to solve for y then. So we'll talk about how to find the inverse, and again, the reason we did the questions we just did a minute ago was so that we could practice solving equations. Okay, so find the inverse. So if you see f of x, we can just make that a y. Now, in order to do the inverse, we're going to flip where the x and y are. So if you didn't have to do this very first step, like consider yourself advanced, you can just go ahead and move along. We're going to switch where the x and y are. So I'm not doing anything fancy there other than switching them. I'm trying to be as opposite as I can be. And so switching the x and y is kind of the easiest way to do that. But now we need to solve this for y, which is why we just did the last 3 practice problems to kind of remind you guys how do we solve like a more complex equation. So what are we going to do to get y alone here? Yeah, square it. Just like we had the, was it like a cube root or 5th root or whatever it was back there, we can raise this to the 2nd power. So we're going to square each side. And the square and square root will cancel. Now to get our y alone, add 4. So that means that y equals x squared plus 4 is the mathematical inverse of that. So those two would be inverse functions of each other. So the way we would write that is we write f like negative 1 of x. I'm not going to worry if you do this, but technically that's how they would write it. So that would be the completely mathematical opposite of our original equation. All right. Number 7 is a little bit tricky. So I'm gonna start you off with reminding you guys that basically this is just the same as this. And then I have to switch up. And then I'm gonna give you guys a second to try and see if you would realize where to. So see if you can solve that one for y. Give you guys a minute. Like I said, we're just going to push through on those because I want people to have time to finish their tests. So I'm going to keep moving here. All right, any ideas? What you guys do? Probably a couple different strategies for this one. Yeah, y minus 6 is on the bottom. I don't like it on the bottom. I want to solve for y. So what Trey suggested was, why don't we just, it's being divided by, why don't we multiply by y minus 6? And you're kind of like, can I really do that? If I multiply by y minus 6, multiply by y minus 6, right, that cancels. So, right, so I have y minus 6 times x equals 5. Are you guys okay? So real quick, are you guys okay with where he's at? Mm-hmm. Okay, I'm going to really quick show you, if you didn't notice that, another thing you could have done, which is essentially the same thing. It might be easier to see if you look at it as a proportion. It's the same thing, it's just written a little bit differently, like maybe it's essentially the same thing you just did. But all right, what are we gonna do next? Yeah, we want to get y alone, so we're going to divide by x, get that x moved over to the other side. So we're going to divide each side by x. That's going to go away. So I'm going to have y minus 6 equals 5 over x. If you don't like that variable in the denominator, that's okay. And then to get our y alone, we're just going to add 6. Yep. So our inverse is 5 over x, and then plus 6. So that's the complete mathematical opposite then of that. The last thing we're going to do here, and then I'll do announcements with you guys, and then, like I said, get you guys released to either work on homework or work on your tests or whatever you guys need to work on for me or for somebody else. Last thing we can do is we can verify an inverse. And what that means is checking that f and g are actually inverses of one another. And maybe just by looking, you're like, it looks about right. But we want to verify it, or like they might use the word prove their inverses. You're not doing some formal proof or anything like that. Basically, the inverse is if I do f of g of x, if I put it into its the other one, everything should cancel out except for x. If it's an inverse, this will be true. Or the other way as well. It doesn't even matter which way we go with it. So if I put them into each other, they're going to end up equaling each other, which means they're inverses of one another. So that's what we're going to do here, is we're going to put this into the other one. And it doesn't matter which way you go, they both will give us the same outcome if it works. So, and typically these do work, but you have to show your work. You can't just say, yep, it's good, like I checked it in my head. So this is like when I say verify or show, you actually have to do that. So this, I'm going to put in place of x. So 6 minus, on top of the fraction, I'm going to 18 minus 3x all over 3. So if that makes sense, I replaced the x with 18 minus 3x. What are we going to do next? I wouldn't multiply by 3, because there's nothing like, this is like what it's going to equal. What can you do instead? Yeah, we actually are going to simplify this. We're going to divide each of these by 3. So both 18 and negative 3 can be divided by 3. 18 minus 3, or divided by 3 is 6. Negative 3 divided by 3 is negative x. But there's an issue here. Does anyone see it? Because right now this is going to equal negative x. Yeah, do you see it? Is that what you're going to tell me?
That's what I was going to say.
Why I kind of missed something here. Does anyone see it? Yeah. Yeah, so technically it's 6 minus this. So both of these are being subtracted. So technically I should have mentioned that this should be distributed there, because that minus, I'm subtracting this whole thing. So this actually does become a positive x. So just kind of watching out for that. I kind of unintentionally left it out, but then now it's kind of good for me to show you that, well, wait, I want it to equal x. What did I do wrong? Because it should equal x. Those two cancel. So like f of g of x equals x. So we checked that it worked. All right. So I'll get you guys your homework. Like I said, I have a bunch of people that need to take care of things for me. So I'll get you guys your homework. It's a worksheet. You can skip number 6. Technically, you probably could do number 6. No, you're fine. You don't need to worry about it. Just remember with the graph, you're just flipping the x and y's. And I do have a short lesson for us tomorrow, so we will learn. We just won't learn for very long.